Mm.
Good morning. I wanted to introduce and thank Dr. Henry Grayson for joining me in this interview today. Dr. Grayson is in Connecticut and I am in New Mexico. I met Dr. Grayson through his writing and also some interviews that he had participated in with others. And I was very interested in your perspective on, as an analyst, how you approach life from this aspect of a full integrated way of living, integrating your mind into the body, to the heart and the spirit. Dr. Grayson received his PhD from Boston University, where he studied with Viktor Frankl, and has a postdoctorate certificate in psychoanalysis and psychotherapy from 4 years training at the Postgraduate Center for Mental Health and in New York City. The book that I'm familiar with that Dr. Grayson wrote is Your Power to Heal, which I am, as you can see from my posted in there, am still in the process of reading. I was particularly interested in your work, Dr. Grayson, because of your work and study of quantum physics and your understanding of our connection to everything, as we are energy beings and everything is our frequencies. And I was also particularly taken with the fact that you studied with Dr. Frankl and your comments in some of your writing and interviews about the influence that he had on you. So to situate this interview, I just want to let people understand that the work that I do as a holistic practitioner is as a reflexologist, and my work integrates how we think, how we feel, what we put into our body in terms of any kind of food, the environment in which we live, and the relationships that we have with everyone, and how all of that integrates into our wellness. So I wanted to ask you, Henry, from the standpoint of working with people and helping them walk through their life so that they can maintain a place of greater ease and happiness, where do you begin?
Well, I think one thing that we need to begin at some point. We can't always immediately. I just like to understand who a person is, what they're dealing with, what their concerns are, and things like that, and get to know a bit of their history. But the thing is that we all forget is that we're all programmed from our past. They say we form our personalities by age 5, but who of us remembers more than 1 or 2 things prior to that time? I remember only 2 things myself. And yet we used to think the womb was a safe place to be. Now we know you can put a little camera in the womb and you photograph the fetus, and that fetus is experiencing every single thing that mother's experiencing. If she's listening to pleasant music, the baby's all relaxed, is having a nice, loving conversation with her husband that's relaxed. If she's worried about something or having an argument with her husband, or mother's dying or whatever, that tension goes right through not only energetically, but through the umbilical cord. The stress hormones go right into the fetus and just reacts like crazy. And so now we know that our programming begins even way back then. And we also know that we're affected by our genes, but we used to be taught in school we're doomed to whatever's there. But now the new school of epigenetics, the new science, tells us, nope, that's not so. Genes are activated or deactivated by the environment. And the environment includes consciousness, because they say it's consciousness and energy, that really affects, the activation of the genetic information. And so I discovered that there are tools we can use that actually can deactivate genetic information that might be causing negative things in our lives. We can actually clear traumas that are occurring even in the uterus. And then the developmental theories say the first year of life is probably the most important year of our lives developmentally. We have more new experiences than any other year. But most of us remember nothing there. I've met 2 people who remembered something in the first year of their lives, and that was it. And so most of us don't. And yet, that was the beginning of our programming, our basic sense of trust or mistrust, our basic sense of being, I'm going to be really loved or taken care of, or I'll be abandoned. How mother was responsive and not responsive to my needs for having my diaper changed or giving me food or whatever, or just being held and nurtured. All of those things begin to form our personalities. And then all that goes through, and we know too that we just literally copy everything that's there. It's hard for me to get that, but one thing that made it so clear to me was I read a story a few years ago about a German Shepherd dog that was pregnant and was running across the road, and she got hit by a car. And it didn't kill her, and it didn't damage the babies in her womb, but it broke her hind legs. And so a few weeks later, she was able to give birth to the baby puppies. And they were all healthy. But guess how they learned to walk? They could only pull themselves with their front paws and drag their hind legs, just like their mother, even though their legs were totally healthy and not broken. And I thought that says so much for us all to recognize that we all copied things that were there from our mothers, from our fathers, from our siblings, from other caretakers. And then we all, for some reason, had our own interpretations of them. Now physicists tell us there's no such thing as a purely objective reality because it's all colored by our interpretation of everything we see. That's why you can't even count on witnesses in a crime to be effective things for a court, because 10 people can see the thing differently. For example, there was a study done at New York University a number of years ago where they got permission at a local school to have a perpetrator run into a classroom of 4th graders and to snatch the teacher's pocketbook and run out of the room. And then they asked all the students to identify that perpetrator. He was tall, he was short. He was a man, it was a woman. He was black, he was white. You know, went on and on. All these different perspectives that they each had. And so what we see, that they weren't seeing an objective reality.
Right.
We're all seeing through our eyes of the past. It's like the wisdom of a Hasidic master back in the 1700s, Rebbe Nachman of Breslau, said, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And I thought that fits right into what developed as quantum physics after that we're seeing through our tinted eyeglasses all the time. So what we need to see is our old programming contained our genes from our past experiences, our ancestors, contains our disturbances in the womb, the process of getting out of the womb, whether that was peaceful or whether it was not, whether they had to take forceps and put them around our neck and pull us out like crazy, you know, to get us out or not. Then that first year of life and how important that is. Then the other developmental years where we just downloaded, like those puppies did, the walking from their mother. And we all download our mother's attitudes, our father's attitudes, their patterns of interacting, the ways we're loved, the ways we are not loved. And so all of that programming gets put into our whole neuroanatomy. And so I find that if we can identify what those are and in some way access them, like Sigmund Freud, when I initially studied psychoanalysis, one thing that I was most impressed by is his attention to the unconscious mind. And the statement now that 95% of all of our behaviors are unconscious. That blows my mind. I'd like to think I'm a lot more conscious than that. But that's a good news too, because I don't think about how I'm formulating every syllable as I'm speaking now. I'm unconsciously speaking and using my words. Or a jazz pianist at a nightclub can be talking to somebody in a conversation, at the same time his fingers running up and down the keyboard making beautiful music unconsciously. Or a teenager.
Could I interrupt for a minute? So I also thought that 95% unconsciousness was a harsh reality. But then I got to thinking that as we go through our lives, we do, consciously or unconsciously, reprogram our unconsciousness. So isn't it really reprogramming of our unconsciousness that really matters, because I know Dr. Bruce Lipton, cell biologist, talks about reprogramming our unconsciousness, and you talk about that a tremendous
Right.
amount, is what brought me to your work initially. So and is our unconsciousness not, I think Jung said, whatever is rejected from the self appears in the world as an event. So all of that is the unconsciousness presenting itself to us. So if we do have that unconsciousness 95% of the time, but we also through consciousness reprogram it. So could you speak to that?
Yes, we all have that programmed in, and a lot of it's positive we want to keep. Like, I want to speak English without thinking about it. I want to use my knife and fork comfortably, like the Chinese like to use their, chopsticks comfortably, and so on. So there's a lot that's unconscious I want to keep, but I want to identify for myself or help other people identify what the sources of programming are back there in that subconscious mind that are causing problems in their life, causing them to be overly anxious, causing them to feel overly powerless, and feel depressed, or feel they can't believe that somebody is really, I got a sign there that the programming, the contact is unstable, the connection right now.
Yes,
Let me open this door and see if I can.
You there?
Well,
Okay.
I'm a little farther away from the windows now than I was before. Our early programming is so deep, and most of it's unconscious. And I find that there are ways now we can access that. And one way I find that is amazing to that I can use muscle testing from applied kinesiology. And I find that deeper wisdom, we know what's true or false. Like if I test somebody's arm and ask them to resist it and push it down, and say, have them to give me their accurate name or a false name, or the accurate location or an inaccurate one, or color of clothes they're wearing or an error, the wrong color. I find the arm always gets strong on the true statement. And so when I can do that about multiple things that are obviously true and false, I can trust a little bit more of the things that are not so clear to us. And I can find out if they're genetic memories that are adversely affecting my life today or their life today. And if the arm goes strong, it says, yes, they are. I came to this by accident, actually. When back in the 90s, I just learned one of the newer tools. I just learned EMDR, for example, and I just learned thought field therapy, and both of which originated in California. And I just learned the muscle testing along with it. I had a woman who was coming to see me who was severely anxious. And not only I started off with psychoanalysis, but I was always open to learning other modalities and had different values and for different problem areas. And so I tried everything that I'd known, and nothing was working to help her with the anxiety. And one day she came in saying, I think I was born with this. I've had this all my life. And I thought, what does that mean? I know it sounds like it's genes, but what do we do about that? But I thought, let me just check it out and test it and be sure. And I said, there's one muscle. This comes from some ancestral information. Arm got really strong. I said, there was one genetic memory. Tested it. No, 2 genetic memories was weak. 3 genetic memories got strong. 4 genetic memories went weak. I thought, wow, I've never known this before. What do I do now? Then I thought about one of the algorithms I'd learned from thought field therapy, which does a combination of bilateral brain stimulation and meridian stimulation, stimulating energy meridians. And I thought, well, that combination might be a good thing. It covers more bases. And conscious intention is what rules according to new physics. So let's put all that together and see if it works. And so we selected the first genetic memory, did that clearing about how to focus on whatever it might be. I suggested she instruct her mind to do the equivalent of a wireless web search, just like we can do with our computers or iPhones, but we can do that wireless. So and the mind is all interconnected. Maybe we could do it just mind to mind, or the universe. That opened my my mind to a whole variety of other things, because as I did that, she went to wherever that was. We did the clearing of that thought field therapy on that, and we brought it down from a strong influence. It was a 10 down to a 0. We did that with the other 2 genetic members, and we finished the session. She was gone. I was away the next week for a week, speaking at a conference, and came back. She comes in bounding into my office as happy and excited I've ever seen her. She said, "For the first time in my life, I'm free of anxiety. I can't believe it." I thought, wow, I am so glad the universe taught me something through her. That what quantum physics is saying is we're all interconnected, and it's consciousness that rules. And that was spiritual wisdom throughout the centuries in many traditions too. And so I thought, wow, that's opened up a whole new world for me. And so I find that doing that, we can get more to those early programmings that people have. And we can use the various tools, and they can use the muscle testing to determine which one's best to use, even if they've never heard of it. The arm will get strong on one because they're connecting with that information in the unified field and part of that oneness. And so I feel like I was really blessed that day with that woman having her severe anxiety and coming in and saying, I think I was born with it. Suddenly it opened up a whole new realm for me.
Well, to be able to access that is a real gift. And I guess what I'm wanting to find out through your work is how do we today, when we have circumstances that are external, how do we manage those? Because as you just gave that example, when there's that internal experience, then we have tremendous control there. Now, I want to reference back to Dr. Viktor Frankl and the work that he brought to you in your graduate courses, because there he was imprisoned in the camps. And I remember reading when I was in my early 20s and being astonished that he could find a place of peace and calm and joy. And I thought, how could anyone do that in that kind of environment? And that stuck with me all the way through my life and has taken greater and greater meaning. So I'm going to lead up to something, but if you could just talk a little bit about what you learned from him in that, and what that gave you in terms of your own insights and inner connection and yeah, all of that.
Yeah, well, he of course shared his experiences in the camp with us, and he talked about the cruelty of the way the guards often treated the people, and how people from time to time were hauled off to the gas chambers to be killed. And but he observed something. He observed that some people were abused more by the guards than others, and some of those same people were hauled off to the gas chambers earlier, and others weren't. Some were really befriended by the guards. And as he betrayed all that, he observed all that, he began to see, well, what's the difference? And he began to get to know these people, and he found it had to do so much with what they were thinking. And what they were thinking made such a difference. If they were focusing on the horrors of where they were, and what the horrible thing could happen next moment, they could be hauled off to the chambers, or they were going to be abused as soon as the guards came. They were the ones who indeed where that happened. But he also observed that those who were focusing much more on, gee, I can't wait to get out of here and get started with my career again, or go to college, or get married, or get back with my family. Hopefully they're still around. When people focused on these positive things that they were looking forward to doing and eager to get out and do, that was the same person the guard came along and befriended. That was the person that they walked past and went to the next one to haul off to the chambers. And so that made such an impression on me long before cognitive behavior therapy came out, which emphasizes the importance of our thoughts. But before then, he was able to show us and tell us how thoughts really change the whole world for people. And he didn't use this connection, but I thought of that as being like the wisdom of the Buddha 2,600 years ago, when he said, "You are what you think. With your thoughts, you make your world." What a profound statement. And here, Viktor Frankl was kind of clarifying that for us, that that was so, even though he didn't use that comparison. And so it tells us that we are powerful creators with all of our thoughts. And that whatever I'm thinking about, one thing I like to do for myself, for example, and I share this with people I work with, is if I'm thinking a negative thought, I'd like to ask myself, is this something I want to increase? And it's usually, my God, no, that's the last thing I want to increase. I'll remind myself, yeah, but if I focus on it, that's what's going to increase it. That's going to attract it. That gives me the motivation to say, nope, I'm banishing that thought. Let me shift to one that's more positive in some way, and not let that one stay here and me harbor it. And so all that began for me with Viktor Frankl, yes.
That's fantastic. I've not ever had that in-depth understanding until now, and I'm very grateful. You know, I've become very aware. I was healing from a rather serious health issue, cancer, and I used holistic modalities. But the most important thing that I used was thought. And I knew I was not in a constant state of positive, harmonious vibrations, in that state of love. I could not heal. And I became very aware, very sensitive to frequencies at that point in time. I could tell when I was in a harmonious state and when I could be sliding slightly over. I could not be in the vicinity of anything that was dissonant, including human relationships. And I would find myself veering away, avoiding anything that had dissonance, because I knew my own life was now dependent upon my choice, which I knew was my choice of the frequency level that I wanted to hold. So I then became very aware as the food that I put in my body was also creating harmonious impacts on the cellular level, feeding the mitochondria or robbing the mitochondria of its energy. So food has always been my medicine for my body, but I became very aware that within every nanosecond and even smaller dimensions of nanoseconds, that the thought, the emotion, and every food or our environment impact was turning on and turning off the health of our mitochondria and its relationship to the nucleus on the cellular level, that we actually are that finely tuned of a mechanism. And I became absolutely in awe of what we, this entire body. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think it's wonderful that you discovered that. But a point I'd like to add to it, as well as, yes, I like to eat healthily too, and I take some supplements and so on too. But one thing I became so aware of, I live on a hill, and so I can't use the town sewer system. I have a septic tank. One day I drove up, and the guy who pumps the tank happened to be there. I'd never seen him before. So we got out and had a little chat. He was a nice, friendly guy. But he said something I will never forget. He says, "You probably won't believe this, Henry." He says, "but I pumped these tanks for many years. The top 4 or 5 inches of the tops of all these tanks are undissolved pills." That means people are taking vitamins and minerals and medicines, thinking that they're getting benefits from it, but they've never been dissolved. What that tells us is, in line with quantum physics, it's consciousness that rules over matter. Yes. And so if they were believing it was going to help, then it worked even if the pill never dissolved. Well, and I was thinking the same thing would be true for our eating healthily. I mean, yes, I like to eat healthy foods too, but I believe that that's going to help me. And I think that has as much power as the actual content itself.
Yes, and that I understand, because the placebo effect that really is real. And
Joe Dispenza defined that very clearly in his book, "You Are the Placebo."
Right, exactly. I do like to err on the side of caution, but I do feel better that perhaps that's psychological. And that leads us into something that for me is extremely interesting and dear to me because I have been studying the issues of wireless and the upcoming 5G rollout. And so you had mentioned that Viktor Frankl had indicated that, and you comprehend this obviously, that the mind, we can control our mind. And that was what really saved him when he was in the camps. Bruno Bettelheim offered, another analyst who was in Buchenwald, offered that help to prisoners who came into the camps so that they could have their mind intact, and very similar understanding of the power of the mind. Now, as I became aware and studying 5G, I had a moment at which I became terrified. I went into abject terror. And Claire Edwards, who worked for the United Nations for 18 years, has been very involved in 5G. She now currently is living in Vienna. And she, in one of her videos, said, when you become terrified, when you go into that state of terror, you finally understand 5G. And a few days after I had experienced that terror, that abject terror, which I have never experienced in my entire life, I saw that video and I felt such connection to her because she was the only person that I knew who had expressed that. Every single tether that I had in my life, all my passions, anything that could settle me, anything that could give me calm, was no longer there for me because the terror had just ripped all of those things out from underneath me. What I understood 5G to be, with the millimeter frequencies that were initially designed by the US military back a number of decades, they were used for mind control, and they still are today. They also use them as a non-lethal weapon in crowd control. So they can use them to literally instill thoughts into our mind. They can create depression. They can focus these frequencies into people, and they can create sexual aggression. They can create sensations and thoughts of suicide. They can create sensation of mental sensation of inadequacy. Every single nefarious emotion that one could imagine. And they use this as a non-lethal weapon. So here we have this technology that is being deployed all around the world. It's now in Switzerland, it's in China, it's in Korea, it's in Hong Kong, it's in the UK, it's in various cities in the United States. All of this technology without the approval of the American citizens. In fact, it has been done in absence of our awareness. The newspapers do not cover this, the radio stations do not cover this. The telecommunications industry basically has kept all of the airwaves silent. So when I became so terrified, it was the awareness that this technology could be used against us. And my wonderment was, how do I protect my mind? Now, Viktor Frankl was able to protect his mind, but they weren't using external frequencies to come at him. But the military and the governments have become very sophisticated. This is used in China, it's used in Russia, it's used in the United States. So how do we protect our minds?
Well, if what quantum physics says, it's consciousness that rules. And if that is so, I know I've worked with several people through the years, and especially maybe a couple of decade or two ago, I had several people who'd been attacked by those kind of things, who came to me, and that's what put me in touch with it. And I got a chance to read a lot of the articles and research about it then. But it taught me a lot, because I found if they were able to take back their own intrinsic power, because who we are at the core is really, when I think about it, in the various traditions, spiritual traditions of the world, like in the ancient Jewish tradition. There's that creation myth in the book of Genesis. It says, and God said, let there be light, let there be water, let there be firmament, let there be land, and so on. Then it concludes by saying, and he created man in his own image and likeness. I never heard that taught in any Jewish or Christian church, that we are in that same power of creation with our thoughts. And then the same thing when Jesus of Nazareth came along and he says, God, I and my Father are one, you're the same. I never heard that taught in any Christian church. We ignore owning our power. We want to identify more with our powerlessness. The news promotes that by making it purposefully negative 95% of the time, because it activates the old limbic brain and pours out the cortisol and adrenaline. You get as addicted to your own brain chemicals as you can to heroin. And so then people will flock to horror movies. So the media does so much to slow down our involvement and our evolution. But at the same time, we're not powerless victims of all of that. And we don't have to be. Because if I'm part of that oneness and that greater power of the universe, whatever name you give to it, anything I can do to not listen to that voice that wants to pull me down. I call it the ego voice. It's been called many names by many different cultures. The wolf, liar, the great deceiver, the wolf in sheep's clothing, and devil, you've been called many names. But that voice that lies to us, we can do the same thing, not only stopping those thoughts, but I think if we can stay in that deeply centered place more of the time, means I can do more slow, deep breathing to slow down the brain waves in my old reptilian brain, which is one neuroscientist told me was 15 to 18 times more active than it needs to be for our stage of evolution. I thought, wow, no wonder people flock to the negative news or like to commiserate. But if I don't fall into those things, and I can do more deep breathing, I can do more meditation, I can do more monitoring my thoughts, that will help. The other thing I've realized too, that if we talked about the unconscious mind before, that old programming of all the horrors and maltreatments and abandonment and abuse and that people have had in their childhood growing up, if we can deactivate those traumas, then they can use these other tools far more effectively to monitor their thoughts. Whereas if they've not cleared out those old traumas, it's harder for them to monitor their thoughts that create the pain and discomfort. And hard to even stay dedicated to the process of things like meditation or breathing and so on. But if we can clear out, deactivate all those old traumas that are stimulating the reptilian brain, this extra intensity, then that makes it easier for them to use the things like Viktor Frankl taught, or realized, to use our minds to be at peace. And if we can identify with that higher consciousness, then we're less affected by anything that's external. That's why I found in terms of self-healing, I got to it in early years by, I used to have severe sore throats and colds when I was a teenager and in my 20s, several times a year that were very debilitating. And I would take medicines for it and so on. Then I was in my doctoral program and I lived in Massachusetts. In the middle of a snowstorm, my dog, my German Shepherd dog that was getting bigger, was getting out of the fence and there was a highway nearby and he was going to get killed. So I had to do some repair work. And I was out there and I started doing this work and I started to get my sore throat. And I used my best English there. Oh, shit. And then I realized, why? Because I was afraid I was going to come down with that cold and I had to take comprehensive exams 2 days later. And I knew that would affect my mental process. I'd done a directed study. And back in those days, there were only a few things in mind-body research that were out. But that handful of things saw that there was a mind-body connection with some skin disorders, with some digestive problems, and a few things like that. But as I stood out there in that snowstorm, starting to get the sore throat, dreading getting sick so I wouldn't do well on my exam, I thought about that study. I said, wait a minute, how could that be that the brain or the mind affects about 4 or 5 parts of the body but leaves all the rest of it unaffected? That doesn't make sense. I said, how could it not affect every part? If it's affecting any part, it's going to affect every part. And I thought, well, why might I need this cold? get me out of the exam. And I thought, nope, I don't want that, because I've been working and giving up weekends to study. I want to get back to enjoying having a good time on weekends with my family and with my friends. I thought, well, what else is it? Some emotion I'm stuffing down? And I saw my neighbor looking out of her kitchen window, and I felt guilty. And I said, ooh, what's this about? Then I realized for the first time in my life, even though I'd gone through courses and projective tests, first time I realized how we all are projecting all the time. I projected onto her that she was standing behind that kitchen window. She was thinking thoughts about me. What's he doing out there doing this work in this horrible weather for his dog when he's not done what he's going to do for my father? Well, I had a commitment already. I knew I'd always keep my commitments. I was wanting to help me move some furniture in her house for her father, who was aged. And I was going to do that on Tuesday after I took the exam on Monday. So I knew I wasn't feeling guilty that I was trying to get out of it or anything, and I was not going to do it. But my thoughts were, I projected onto her that thought of blame and guilt. I thought, how will I deal with that thought? Because I know I'm not trying to get out of doing what I promised to do for her. I keep my word. And I thought, well, just to make it clear to myself, my psyche, when I finish the work, I'll go in and pick up the phone and I'll call her and say, just want you to know, I haven't forgotten your father. Got comps on Monday. I'll be over on Tuesday like I promised. I made that commitment. Guess what? Within less than a half hour, my sore throat symptoms all were just gone. And it never developed into a cold. It's been decades. I've never had a cold since. Why? Not because that one thing lasted, but because what I did with it lasted. When I'd start to get the beginning symptoms, I start asking myself those questions. Why might I need this? What would it get from me? What would it get me out of doing? What emotions expressed in it? Is there some unclear trauma? Is it a download from my parent? I kept expanding the list. And I found if I had another way of dealing with it, then the symptom would just go. And then I had the big one that I didn't awaken to for a number of years, when I had a severely degenerated disc. I'd always done a lot of sports, but no stretching and all that sort of stuff. And it was so degenerated, I couldn't move a centimeter without being jabbed with an ice pick, felt like. And I read the research about back surgery. The doctor said, you won't walk again without back surgery. I read the research about it, and I discovered that at that point, 68% of the time, you were worse off after having the surgery. It's more effective now. But I thought, I want to take a chance of being worse off. That's the last thing I want. And then I thought, remember what I'd done with Coles. I thought, it took being hit over the head with a 2x4, like with that illness, for me to wake up to realize I had the power within to make a difference, like I'd done with Coles. I'm the one that said you couldn't do it for anything else. I ignored it as if that was true. But it took that big one that I might never walk again, to wake me up to realize I could use it. And I've used that ever since now, and I've expanded the list and have about 8, 9 questions I ask myself. And I do that with any symptom, little or big, that occurs to me. Because I found if I can get that way to the unconscious mind, like Candace Pert, the researcher at the National Institute of Health, put out a work back in the late 80s, I guess it was. Your body is your subconscious mind, was the title of it. I thought that was so profound that Candace put out that, and so I thought, that's another way to access the unconscious mind. Freud was trying to it, and he found a few ways of trying to do it, but he didn't know others, and most of his followers did like religions and made whatever he did into a doctrine. And so let me just a minute, because the phone is ringing and disturbing, and I'm going to cut it off.
So, Henry, in all of that, I'm going to move it into the aspect of technology again, very pointedly. So what research is showing us, and our own experiences are showing us, is that these devices, our cell phones and our computers and being online, and they're addicting. We're seeing generations of young people totally addicted to these wireless devices.
Right.
And as you and I were working initially to try and figure out how to make this Zoom conference call work, and I was saying, well, I'm happy to know that I'm very human and I still don't have a computer brain, because it takes me a while to figure this stuff out. Because what I find is that I'm having to align with the technology in a way that is using my left side of my brain, not my right side of my brain. And I become more computer-like each time I learn something about how to work a computer. And I have resisted that over the years because I don't like that infringement. I don't like that loss of my humanness. And I'm very aware of that. And so here we have generations of children growing up with these devices. And we're seeing that the more time young children spend on them, the less time they spend in their right side of their brain and their creative capacities of writing and imagining. And so their own human development in their brain is being changed. Now,
yeah, and the other part too is we know some research shows that teenagers who've been using that have difficulty recognizing emotions in other people's faces. And that's a big issue for relationships too.
It is huge. I mean, and of course there is the focus about integrating artificial intelligence into the human being. There are countries that are embedding chips, microchips into people's bodies to the point where they don't have to even give an identification. They are scanned. And they're being done in the auspices of medical purposes, but we are becoming less and less human with artificial hips and chip implants and now addiction to the wireless where we're not integrating both lobes of our brain. So
Yeah.
Go ahead, comment on that.
Well, I was just thinking too that there's the old saying that is so true: if you don't use it, you lose it. And we know that when we practice something, we get better at it. We deepen it. We stop using it. I think one reason I don't want to drive a self-operated car, I will stop using my brain and my mind, all those things I do to drive a car down a road and miss the traffic and scoot around. I will make myself age much faster and deeper. My memory will be less and less if I follow that going around in an automated car rather than driving it myself. That's just one little piece of my life. But what you're talking about is the wide spectrum of it. I just read last week that the average American stays on devices at least 6 hours a day.
And we're seeing today that there was a lawsuit in Italy, in Turin, and a man who was on his wireless phone holding it to his head for 3 to 4 hours a day developed a tumor. And the courts actually, they actually had a resolve in his favor. So this is a very big win for everyone because we aren't told how dangerous these devices are. But so there are very few people that appear to be totally awakening to the concerns, aren't even seeing it, as if that metaphor of the frog in the pot of water on the stove and the temperature is slowly heating up, aren't jumping out. And people, I see many of my friends who are still holding their phones to their heads, who are keeping it on their bodies. And we're seeing, particularly in the young adults, tremendous outbreak of testicular cancer, breast cancer, rectal cancer, thyroid cancers, all in the places where people are holding their devices. And we're also seeing the breast cancer, the shape of the tumor is the shape of the cell phone. So it's just going to be a matter of time. Now, this all sounds rather devastating, but I'm concerned that it truly is because we have upwards of 30,000 health studies just on 3G or 2G and 3G technology, and we have very little even on 4G because it's so new, and 5G we have no health studies to speak of. So we have to get people aware, and we also have to educate the people, but it's quite terrifying for many people to even look at that, so they ignore it. And we also know that fear is a stressor. and we can
Mhm.
look at our system. It takes us out of that place of healing state. So how do we navigate through that point of becoming educated, going into terror like I did, experiencing the stress, weakening ourselves to that external impact of these wireless technologies? How do we go through that whole process of becoming educated, maintaining some form of protective barrier, or whatever you would say, in order to become educated? And how do we awaken?
Well, I think your question is a broader one even than that. But what you're doing about talking about the influence of all this technology, I think is a very important one, as you're saying. But on the other hand, most human beings going around, we mostly believe our power is outside us, that everything is happening to us. That if I'm unhappy, it's because this person did this or didn't do that, or said this or didn't say that to me. And we feel like the power is outside. We do the same thing about love. We think it's out there somewhere. We have to get it in a certain form, else I'm deprived of love. I think the biggest part we need to do is to remember, bring back together the oneness of who and what we really are. That I am really, as the ancient spiritual tradition said it, I'm in the image and likeness of God. I'm one with that. On the other hand, in quantum physics, I'm one with the unified field of the universe. Whatever language you use doesn't matter to me. But it's not to stay with disowning our powerlessness and seeing everything as happening to us, but continually taking back our power to see, I'm helping to create everything that seems to happen in my life. I'm attracting in some way some kind of things here and there that I'm not even conscious of. Let me reflect on that and see how I'm doing it. Most human beings will say, if I do that, then I have to blame myself and feel guilty. No, that's the ego mind coming in to distort that awareness. We just need to see it and then make another choice. Never blame ourselves. That doesn't do any good. But to see that, let me own the power that's within and let that be who and what I am. That's why there's some of the people in India throughout the centuries have been able to drink poisons and not be harmed by them. You know, the Satya Sai Baba, one of the full avatars over there, a couple was coming to see him and they were in a car in the most horrible roads over there where everybody just got everything in the roads. It's one of the most dangerous places to drive. And they went through a normal procedure and there was a truck coming head on. There's no place to get off the road. Next thing they knew, they thought they were gone. And then they looked back, there was no truck coming anymore. They looked behind them, it was going the other direction. And they got to Sai Baba's ashram, and he greets him with a smirk on his face. I understand you had a little excitement on the way here today. Well, he had used his consciousness. He's one of the rare people. I don't know how to do that. Maybe someday I'll know a little bit more. But he'd use his consciousness to allow the molecules to just pass between each other and go on. Now, how could that be? Well, the new science shows us it's very easy. There's nothing here. We think this body is real. We think this table is real. This computer is real. But what about in the laboratory upstate when you crush an atom? Our bodies are comprised of atoms, right? And this table is comprised of atoms. But in the laboratory upstate in New York, you crush an atom. What do you find? There's nothing there but a spark of energy and information. That fits in with the quantum physics perspective of consciousness ruling. That's energy and information that rules, not the matter. The more we can move into that state of mind, the more we protect ourselves from germs, the more we protect ourselves from these other electronic forces that you're talking about, the more we protect ourselves with our own thoughts, from our own thoughts. As we take back the reality to remember our oneness. It's like I think of that image in that movie, The Lion King, where at the end of the movie, the Lion King's going to retire and he has a son who's going to take over. They're on this cliff overlooking the jungle and the son's terrified. The Lion King bellows out, remember who you are. You're my son, you're son of the king, you're going to take over. I thought that's the message for all of us. We need to remember our oneness with this larger universe, universal power and intelligence, whatever name you give to it. And the more we can do that, the more we sustain our health. Or if we get a symptom, we heal more quickly. Or we may even protect ourselves more from this technological stuff around and energetic things around. If I spend more time centering myself into that oneness and my deep breathing and remembering that I'm part of that oneness. Because we now know that, according to the New England Journal of Medicine, back in the 80s, 80 to 90% of all of our symptoms are stress-related that we take to a primary care physician. And so if we're doing all these other things to reduce stress, if I'm meditating, if I'm catching my thoughts, if I'm clearing out past traumas, if I'm clearing out the programming in my computer brain of beliefs that are negative, I'm no good, I'm not lovable, I'll be rejected, I can't do, or all those kind of things. Anytime we're doing all that, we're aligning ourselves with our stronger energy in whatever we're doing. And then if we do that too, we won't have to rely on the technology so much, which is so damaging.
Wow. So, so that's very empowering. And it makes me want to ask another question. So here we have these external technologies, and we have children who aren't awakened. And so they really become victimized by these technologies that are designed to create addiction within them. Then we have you and me and a whole slew of other people. Some of us are wanting to become more and more aware of this technology. I always think that the more educated I become, the more empowered I am, because then I can make a choice. If I'm not educated about something, I don't know why I might want it or might not want it. So why would I maybe want 5G or not want 5G? And as I look into it and I look into wireless, I realize I don't want it, because from a biological perspective, it's dangerous. It's damaging. We're seeing tremendous increases in Alzheimer's and in dementia, and the health studies are showing the connection between the damage to the stem cells in Alzheimer's and dementia patients, and wireless technology. It goes to it like cancer goes to sugar, and cancer cells go to sugar. And so as we become educated about it, there's a certain amount of stress that happens until we can, in my experience, until I can relax into the empowerment. Because now that I have this information and I continue to grow the information, I become more and more empowered. And I want to know the information. So as a writer, as an educator, I am learning more of this information. But how do we awaken other people to become empowered? Because as long as they're using the technology that has biological impacts that are damaging them, carrying them on their bodies when they're on their antennas, they're emitting radio frequencies that are damaging their bodies. Unless we're consciously aware of how to use some of these damaging technologies, we are being victimized by them. And people, so how do we open people's minds to becoming aware of these technologies, because so many people don't seem to know?
Well, I think there are 2 or 3 different levels of that. I think one is, yes, any way we can get that out, in articles or books or TV shows or whatever it is, and spread that information, that can be useful. But also we need to really help people to realize that they can protect themselves from a lot of those waves too, if they're aligning themselves with that higher consciousness. Then they're less likely to be as victimized by whatever's around them and being sent out. And that's not something we can spread very rapidly, because most of the world isn't open to seeing it. Most people are afraid of owning their own power. They see the powers outside and love outside, as I said before. But the more we can be that, that's the way we have the effect. It's like Gandhi's great wisdom, everybody's quoted, be the change you want to see. And the more we can be that with all the people around us and put forth that energy, because every thought now we know there's no such thing as a private thought. every thought we're thinking is affecting everything around us. It affects plants, it affects water molecules, it makes them thrive, makes them die, affects everybody. You think about it when you go into a room and somebody is very depressed, you feel those vibes. If somebody is very happy and joyous, you feel those vibes. Well, it's not just those extreme things. We're all picking up everything all the time. And that's a start to realize that with the people who are more dramatic, but that's not the end of it. We're all picking up all the vibes. So it's not just to focus on, oh my God, they're doing this to me, but it's to shift. What am I doing for myself and emanating out to them in the world? Like one example, for example, I gave, never share the woman's identity, somebody I worked with years ago who was a senior vice president of a major corporation. And her division was down a little bit in profits for that quarter. And the regular meetings of vice presidents each week, like 60 or 70 of them, he was the president or the CEO was up on the podium just chopping her down to bits because her profits were down in her division that quarter. And that's common in all corporations. That varies all the time. The profits in this division or that division go up and down, but he was just chopping her down. And she'd mentioned one day, I think he's just really scared that he might get fired or something. And so I said, well, would you like to, she said, and I wish I could just resign, but in my state, I can't. It's not like a regular job when you're at a senior level, a vice president level. You have a contract, and that would affect my whole career and the whole legal system in that. And I said, and she said, I wish there's something I could do. And I said, well, would you like to hear something that might be a little far out to you? But she said, well, I told you I'd do anything because I'm desperate. So I said, well, there's all the science that says mind is interconnected. And we are affecting others by our thoughts all the time. And I said, you've recognized that your boss is running scared. He's afraid he'll lose his job, and I think that makes sense. He'll get fired. He'll lose his mansion on Long Island. He'll lose his one in the Rocky Mountains and the one in the Bahamas and his chauffeur-driven Rolls Royce and all that stuff. And she said, yeah, I think he's terrified. I said, how about before you go into the meeting each week, go into your office and close the door. That's when we used to have private offices. And just take some deep breaths for about 5 minutes and picture him on the podium and just think about how frightened the little boy inside him is about losing his job. That there's that part of him that's just feels so little and so frightened. And just send him compassionate healing energy that fear will heal for the sake not only of himself, but for the whole company and for everybody. She said, it sounds like the silliest thing I've ever heard of, but I told you I'd do anything because I'm desperate. And she did. Well, I was away for a couple of weeks for vacation and came back. She came back in just saying, I'm not sure about it, but it seems like he's on my case a lot less than it used to be. Is it okay if I keep doing this? And I said, well, why not? If it's working, why not? Within 3 months' time, she totally turned the whole thing around. Instead of his being on her case, he made her into his personal confidant, was inviting her out to his mansion to have cookouts with his family. And the whole works there just turned totally around, all because she started thinking different thoughts about him. Instead of fear thoughts and victim thoughts, she was owning her intrinsic power because the strongest power is love, and was sending that, and it made a transformation. I've seen a similar thing happen with many people who've done something like that. And so we can go around feeling like we're the powerless victims of this, that, or the other, whatever it is. But if we can go back and take back our power, even with the most powerful things, and own that I'm part of this oneness. And that's where the strongest power of the universe lies. And when I can let myself begin to own that more and more, I still don't own it 100%. I'm not going to walk in front of a car and trust the molecules will pass between me. Listen, I'll be out. I haven't learned it that way. I'm not, but there are people in the world who have. And so that inspires me to want to keep practicing it. And if I can practice it and I can share with people how I've practiced it and how it worked, and that's what inspires others. And so if we can practice with the people we work with, we can practice to other therapists we train, we can talk with friends about it or whatever, and send forth that energy to everybody who needs it too, then that's the best way we can help ourselves and help all others.
Very fine. So in concluding on this part and in our interview here we have this very concerning rollout of technology worldwide,
Mm-hmm.
capacity to quite literally intrude into our lives in ways that will be able to determine our thoughts, our actions, our comings and goings, the surveillance part of a smart home, smart chipped cars. So how in the world do we protect against that other than not purchase those items, not participate in that system? I mean, I have
Well, that'd be one way.
I've thrown away my cell phone. Is there another way that we could do it from a self-empower? I mean, that's self-empowering to me. Is there another way to do that?
Well, I think that, like I said before, we can spread the word about the harmful nature of it, and whatever avenues we can find and open ourselves to it, that will help people become more conscious. But on the other hand, since it's moving beyond our realm of consciousness, we can do primarily the things where we connect with our inner real power. And the more we can do that, the more I can meditate, the more I can catch my negative thoughts, the more I can do deep breathing, the more I can change my negative beliefs, and the more I can practice anything that reduces my stress level and it brings me in touch with my highly empowered self. And I can spread the word about using those things. That helps protect us against anything outside.
Very fine. I want to thank you for a very important interview and for your wisdom. Is there a way that people can contact you for further consulting in terms of?
Well, I'll be glad to share that. Yeah, my if 2 or 3 things come to mind, by phone, I could be reached at 212-582-1792. That's my New York office, or my Connecticut is 203-454-1745. Or I guess that I could Google my name, and that would take them to some information to find that. Or read one of my books, Your Power to Heal, or some more recent one, or the other one about basically on love and relationships and how the power of that and so on. So anyway, I'm open to any of those possibilities, and if I can be of help to people, sure, I do sessions for people all around the country and other countries. But the main thing, I think, is for each of us just to be that. And the more we can be that, we're emanating that. And if somebody is wanting to work with me to learn how to be that and emanate it more, I'm glad to help with it where I can.
Well, thank you. Thank you.